understanding your FERPA. I hope that you're all well again. I really do. And so I wanted to talk about FERPA and what that means. I'm going to start screen sharing. Be sure that if you have any questions, you put them in the comment field. And if I can't answer them right away as I'm doing the show, I will go back after and I will answer your questions. So let's begin. All right, so we have here the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Okay, as you can see right here, this FERPA was enacted by Congress to protect the privacy of students and their parents. The act is designed to ensure that students and parents of students may obtain access to students' educational records. There have been some amendments to FERPA. Those amendments were in 2008 and 2011. Definitely want to make sure you are up to date with understanding your FERPA rights. It is a requirement for federally funded institutions under programs administered by the U.S. Department of Education to comply with FERPA. Okay, so you need to make sure that you're paying attention and you are going to learn exactly what you should be looking for right in this session. FERPA was not enacted to preclude the disclosure of educational rights, but it was to not make it impossible to be able to understand this stuff and delineate this stuff, right? Educational records, simply because the records identify a student by their name. It was designed to protect the student's educational information and status as a student, right? So what is the scope of FERPA? We're looking at what does FERPA cover? Because it is about students, they have to then identify and define what a student is. Okay, so according to FERPA, a student is an individual who is enrolled in and actually attends an educational institution. I know that a lot of us are, learning virtually right now, and so does that include virtual students? Yes. So the regulations provide that attendance includes, but is not limited to, attendance in person or by correspondence. However, what you do need to know is that courts have held that individuals who merely audit a class, so for you college students, FERPA still applies. I'm talking about that at the end. Don't think that it doesn't apply to you, because it does. Who merely audit classes or who are accepted to an educational institution but do not attend any classes are not students. So if you're auditing a class, make sure that you are aware that FERPA rights don't apply to you, okay? And so be careful with what you're sharing. Be careful with what you are putting into like chats and things like that, because you really don't have any FERPA rights by just auditing class. However, your information will be out there, okay? Individuals who attend classes but are not physically located on a campus are also considered students. So even if you're remote, whether you're a college student or at home learning, FERPA does apply to you, okay? Including those who attend classes by video conference, satellite, internet, or other electronic information and telecommunications technologies, okay? What does FERPA prohibit? FERPA prohibits the disclosure of students' protected information to a third party, okay? If you did not consent, and check your consents and check the third parties. We're going to be talking about that. If you did not consent to have your students, or if you're a student and you didn't consent, information shared to a third party, then you need to be really making sure that you state that. I did not consent to my child's protected information being shared with third party. This disclosure is prohibited whether it is made by hand delivery, verbally, fax, mail, or electronic transmission. Disclosure also includes provision of access to the educational institution's Career Center database of student resumes, okay? So what is a third party? Let's talk about that. For purposes of FERPA, A third party is an individual or organization other than the student or the parent. That means us, right? With respect to third parties, even if the initial disclosure of protected information is permissible, FERPA limits the subsequent disclosure of the information by the third party. Okay, so you need to be paying attention to who those third parties are. Did you grant permission for your records or your students' records to be disclosed to that third party? As such, once an educational institution discloses protected information to a third party, it must ensure that the third party does not itself improperly disclose the information in violation of FERPA. So if you have granted permission for your students' information, and I'll talk about exactly what types of information is delineated with FERPA and protected. If you did not grant permission for that third party, or if you did, you need to be making sure that the person that handed over that information is also following up and responsible for protecting that information, right? Protecting that information. They can't just give up the information, whether you gave permission or not, and not follow through with the third party to really look at how that information is being shared. And so let me go back to screen sharing. Oh yeah, I'm still screen sharing. And let's see here. Let me continue this. There we go. All right. So talking about FERPA, y'all, talking about understanding your FERPA rights, and what is protected information. Let's talk about what protected information is. FERPA, sorry if I didn't say it, is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. See right here. You can look this up. I always say fact check. If you type this piece into your search bar, you should come up with your FERPA rights, okay? I'm going to drop this in the comment field right now so that you can, hello, Maritza. I see that Maritza's saying hello. Thank you. Please share. All right, there you go. Understanding your FERPA rights, right? FERPA is a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records. The law applies to schools that receive funds, like I said, under an applicable program of the U.S. Department of Education, right? So let's talk about protected information. What is protected? FERPA does classify protected information into 3 categories. That's going to be your educational information, right? Personally identifiable information and directory information. So your address, phone number, students' grades, and all of that stuff cannot just be shared without your permission and consent to a third party, right? The limitations imposed by FERPA vary with respect to each category. Well, what categories are they talking about? The limitations imposed by FERPA will vary according to educational information, what can be shared and what cannot be disclosed, right? According to personally identifiable information, what can be shared and what cannot. According to directory information, what can be shared and what cannot. If you are not receiving a permission slip or whatever your school calls it, or authorization to disclose information every year, you need to be questioning that practice. Like, wait a minute, I need to find out what permissions I need to grant and what permissions I want to revoke. And I also would like to know who the third parties are that you're sharing my students, or if you're a student, information with. So pay attention, okay? Although personally identifiable and directory information are often similar or related, FERPA provides different levels of protection for each. So again, it's going to vary by category. What is personally identifiable? Ask that. What is your regulations or rules around personally identifiable information and directory information, right? Because they are similar and related, you want to understand your rights with regards to protecting your child's information and your information, right? So FERPA provides different levels of protection for each. Personally identifiable information can only be disclosed if the educational institution obtains the signature of the parent or student. If your student is over the age of 18, make sure that you sit down with them as they are signing documents to find out what it is that they're authorizing, right? Make sure if there are any verbal or email agreements to disclose that you follow back up with that and make sure what was disclosed, okay? Failure to comply with FERPA rules, law, requirements will result in the violation of FERPA, okay? So these are things that you definitely want to know. Let's go to this right here, right? FERPA gives rights and certain rights with respect to your child's education. These rights transfer to the student when they reach 18. I just said that, right? So this will tell you about the compliance, the rules, the regulations. We have right here, generally schools must have written permission from a parent or eligible student in order to release any information from the student's education record. However, pay attention to those exceptions. Always pay attention to those exceptions to the rules so that you are fully aware of your rights, their responsibility, and so that if anything happens, and I will tell you that it does, okay? So we don't want to assume that everything's already going to be taken care of. Things happen all the time. Information gets out that's not disclosable, personally identifiable information, directory information, even medical information. The stories that I know you would are unbelievable, okay? And so we really want to be paying attention to these exceptions. Here are the following parties under the following condition, right? So here it says, school officials with legitimate educational interests, other schools to which a student is transferring, specified officials for audit or evaluation purposes, appropriate parties in connection with financial aid to a student, organizations conducting certain studies for or on behalf of the school, right? Check that out. What organizations and affiliations are we talking about? Ask your child's school. If you're a student, ask what organizations are going to have be privy to my records. I would like to know what types of studies are they going to be conducting. Are those studies really for and on behalf of the student? It says they're on behalf of the school, but find out if you do not want to be a part of that, then how can you revoke permissions to be a part of that? Who are the appropriate parties in connection with financial aid? It may not be the people that you think. You might want to check out. Who are they? You can ask these questions, right? Crediting organizations, again, find out who they are. To comply with a judicial order or lawfully issued subpoena, that's clear as and cut as it can be. Appropriate officials in cases of health and safety emergency. Who are these appropriate officials, right? You want to be checking this. I'm sure that we're talking about emergency and medical practitioners, but are you really certain? You want to ask these questions. State and local authorities, right? Find out which ones with the juvenile justice system pursuant to specific law. If you feel like your student's information has been disclosed to any of these parties, ask when and find out how and for what, right? Ask those questions, right? Schools may disclose without consent directory information such as a student's name, address, telephone number, date and place of birth, honors and awards, and dates of attendance. Pay attention to that. However, schools must tell parents and eligible students about directory information and allow parents and eligible students a reasonable amount of time to request that the school not disclose. That is exactly what I'm talking about. If they have consent, and you don't want them to, and you really want to ask them these questions. Who are they disclosing your information to, whether it's directory, educational, or identifiable personal information, right? That's a lot of information to be out there. Students' names, address, telephone numbers, and place of birth. That's a lot of information. I mean, you know, you might as well say social security number. No, I'm joking, but I'm not. Anyway, the schools must notify the parents and eligible students annually of their rights under FERPA. If you did not receive that notification, you definitely want to ask for it. Find out what it is. Don't assume, you know, we don't want to assume. And so I want to make sure that you're very clear on understanding that FERPA is meant to protect you and your students' personally identifiable information, educational information, and directory information, to include their place, date of birth, addresses, phone numbers, and all of that type of stuff. And so you have to understand who has access to those records, which affiliations and organizations have access, what types of studies are being done. You know, you definitely want to make sure of that. I'm gonna share a document right here. 1 second. Just want you guys to don't expect that your information is always going to be protected, right? So here is something that I'm also going to be putting in the chat, and it talks about ways, unintentional ways that students' records may be violated, right? You see that right here. From EdSurge, always look at the source. Unintentional ways schools might be violating FERPA, okay? It says right here exactly what I was telling you. Parents own the FERPA rights of their child until the child turns 18 or enters a post-secondary institution. There are exceptions. Remember I told you pay attention to those exceptions. I want you to know, fully understand, be well-informed around your rights. Activate them, ask questions, make sure that you have a copy of any disclosures that you may, authorizations to disclose information that you may have signed. Is it up to date? If you didn't get one every year, find out why. Find out which information is being shared to who and why. Okay, those are questions that are within your rights to ask. Okay, so here is one right here. Here is where we're talking about violations of FERPA. If a school denies access to student records to a parent or a student under the age of 18, that is a FERPA violation. Okay, it is also a violation to deny the student access to his own record, provided that the student is at least 18 or enrolled in post-secondary institution. Here is a part where I have heard from on the most from parents, right? I was not allowed to have access to the records. Really? That's interesting, right? That should not be. If you feel like your FERPA rights have been violated, definitely file with the U.S. Department of Education a complaint about those violations. Make sure if you have dates and times that you requested, if you have it in writing, which I would definitely admonish you to put everything in writing. If you have an email that you sent, definitely want to send that if you feel like your rights have been violated to the U.S. Department of Education department that handles FERPA violations, right? Here is something they talk about being cautious. They give an example. If a teacher witnesses an incident, such as a fight on school grounds, he can't talk to, say, other parents or the press about what he saw. But if the principal reads a report about the same incident, she can't talk about it publicly. Some people are now clearly seeing their FERPA rights may have been violated. You need to make sure that you understand your rights so you can activate your voice and activate your rights by following up and saying, hey, you know, you're not allowed to do this, okay? You cannot violate FERPA. Here it is clearly, tells you what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. Make sure that you understand it. So I am definitely going to, I left that in the chat. And for you parents, I just want to stop sharing for a minute. For you parents that have children that are protected under IDEA, they have other rules and regulations as far as the extra layer protection for students with disabilities. You definitely want to understand what those are. And if you would like for me to talk about that, please drop that in the comment field, and I will definitely talk about FERPA and IDEA, okay? Because that's a whole nother show, and you're just not gonna take the time. I just wanted to give you a basic understanding of FERPA. 3 categories, okay? Remember those 3 categories: directory information, educational information, identifiable information. Talking about your information in your students' records, their information protected. Understand that, right? Information cannot be disclosed without your permission. There are some exemptions. I talked about that. Make sure you know what they are. There are organizations and other party affiliations, what is called third party in the law. Third parties that may have access to your information. Those 3 categories that I just talked about. Make sure you know who they are and what are they using the information for. Make sure you ask to see who is going to hold them accountable for the information and how long they have access to your child's information. Definitely want to know that. If you haven't received a consent, permission slip, authorization to disclose information or to not disclose, ask where it is. You definitely want to see the dates on that. You should be getting that yearly. And so I'm going to go to information for students, okay? Guidance for students. If you're a college student, you want to make sure you understand your rights. You do not have to give up or disclose all of your information. Just because you think you do doesn't mean that you have to. Understand your rights. So right here is a guidance for students. Who is an eligible student? Well, we talked about that earlier in the last tab. Students that are of age 18 or have are enrolled in a post-secondary institution are considered qualifying students. This guidance is for you. If you have a college student, make sure that they are paying attention to all the fine print, everything that they're signing. Who is this information going to be disclosed to and for how long and why, right? And so it tells you right here, and I just want to point out this part. FERPA is a federal law that is administered by the Family Policy Compliance Office in the U.S. Department of Education. You can definitely type this in the chat, in the search bar, and you will come up with all this information. FERPA applies to all educational agencies and institutions, for example, schools, that receive funding under any program administered by the department. Parochial and private schools at the elementary and secondary level generally do not receive such funding and are therefore not subject to FERPA, right? Private post-secondary schools, however, generally do receive such funding and are subject to FERPA. I am going to drop this information in the chat. If your student is a private or parochial school student, you need to find out, is that school receiving funding from the U.S. government, right? If they're not, and it's all, just paid, I would still use this as a guide to ask what information is going to be disclosed. How do you consent or revoke your consent for that information to be disclosed, and why? Which organizations or studies may be being conducted with your students' information? What directory information? Remember those 3 categories: directory, educational, and identifiable information. Who is that going to be shared with? What is going to be shared in those 3 categories? This would be a guideline that you could use to ask those questions so that you're protecting you and your child's information, you're protecting your personally identifiable information, and you're protecting directory information. You don't want your information to go out to everybody. You want everybody to have your email address, your phone number, and all of that stuff. Protect your household. Okay, and so I'm going to also leave a quick reference for college students that you could take a look at. This one in particular is from Purdue, but it's still a guideline that you can look at to help you. Okay, and so here, if you're a college student, post-secondary education institution does not have your FERPA rights and their responsibilities under FERPA, if they haven't given them to you, ask for them, please. Okay, they should. And if they aren't in a place where you can locate them and other students can locate them, definitely contact the Office of the Registrar and ask them to make them public so that you understand your rights, their role and responsibility in protecting your records, who has access, and all of that. So here they delineate this for college students. What rights do students have under FERPA, which I just went through, right? You do have the right to inspect and review your education records. No one can deny you that. You have a right to request an amendment to your education records. I've done that before, right? When I look through records and I see something that is not correct, or not correctly stated about my children, I request an amendment to their education records because I do not want that bad record and that bad information to follow them throughout the course of their educational journey. You wouldn't either. If you need more help with understanding how to do that, you can contact me, Christina at npunion.org. Of course, I'm here to help. Right to consent to disclosures of personally identifiable information contained in your records, right? So this is for you college students, post-secondary education institution students, for you 18 and uppers. Definitely understand what your rights are. What is the directory information? It tells you right here, this is a lot to just be given away, dates of attendance, all of that, right? And so find out what your college is saying and exactly where it is. So here is some other information that I'm going to leave in the chat. Let's see. Let me stop screen sharing. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to give you a basic rundown of the FERPA, right? Your FERPA rights, what is protected information, what is not, understanding your FERPA rights. Students understand your FERPA rights. Make sure that you are consenting with information, making an informed decision, not just signing things. You don't want all of that information disclosed. That is some personally identifiable information that you do not want certain organizations or people having access to that. Don't blindly sign consents for disclosures of information. Make sure you know your rights. Okay, and so I hope that helps.